Hi world, my name is Nathaniel, and today I have a very special video for you. I don't know if you've heard of Isaac Arthur, but he is one of the most entertaining and informative science and science fiction personalities on YouTube. He covers a broad range of incredibly exciting and stimulating topics, and I value his opinions and his knowledge on all these topics very much. He's a very well-read, imaginative, and insightful person who pays close attention to detail, and this shines through in his wonderfully articulate videos. I'm going to be responding to a portion of a video he did on the concept of a post-scarcity society and what the economy of such a future world might look like. I'm not going to be commenting on most of his video dealing with the post-scarcity concept, as this is not what interests me for the purposes of making this video. My focus is instead going to be on his stipulations and doubts about the potential of a moneyless society. I'd like to mention before we begin that I fully understand that Isaac was likely coming at this conversation from the perspective of being a long-time science and science fiction enthusiast, and not because he necessarily disagrees with the resource-based economy as a concept. I'm not sure if he's even heard of it, to be honest. Now let's begin. I leave the floor to Isaac.
Post-scarcity does not necessarily mean everybody has everything in their own homes after all. It is about convenience and efficiency. So there might be a local fleet of automated cars hanging around when folks needed one that drives over and picks you up, unless you really wanted your own. This brings up money because there will always be weird things people want for whatever reason, and unless you are tampering with human psychology, you have to be able to meet those needs or you are not post-scarcity. Which is fine. A lot of utopias do assume people are all being educated to rise above certain needs. But again, we are trying for the widest possible picture.
I really appreciated that Isaac brought up the fact that even in a post-scarcity world there would still be scarcity to some degree, whether that be conditional or absolute. And I appreciated that he mentioned that the goals of these futuristic economies would be convenience and efficiency. Efficiency is a very important word which we will revisit later in the video. Where I must disagree is with his assertion concerning the utility of money. As a mechanism for trade which satisfies individual preferences or needs, money has been historically useful, but historic utility does not necessitate future use of such a concept. I would like to raise the possibility that the development of an economy which provided unimpeded access to goods or services, and which created an abundance of essential and basic resources for its inhabitants, would be a sufficient characteristic to qualify as a post-scarcity economy, and the development towards such an economy could foster a cultural shift, thus making obsolete the concept of ownership or property as it exists today, to be replaced with the concepts of possession and use. The notion that one would need to own anything in an economy where these resources were perpetually available would likely seem an antiquated idea to a citizen of such an advanced society. For these reasons, the notion that re-education or psychological adjustment of any sort would be necessary to alter individual preferences as they concern material resources seems absurd to me. I feel that Isaac was simply applying the perspectives of a contemporary individual living in a developed nation to a theoretical society which would be different in fundamental ways. We must remember to consider the developmental process when explicating opinions on the qualities of any futuristic society to provide clear context and depth to our analyses. Assuming static social perspectives and cultural norms in an evolving economic atmosphere is, to me, faulty logic.
You probably could have a society that did not have money, but basically every hypothetical or fictional go at this I've seen either just does this by proclamation or just gets rid of money by calling it something else. That slams up against my own suspension of disbelief.
This is where I'd like to exit considerations of science fiction and posit that a conceptual framework by which a civilization could function without money already exists. It's called the resource-based economy. From this point forward, I will be arguing for the validity of such a concept. I promise there will be no hand-waving or mere substitution of one type of currency for another.
Even in a system where everyone is allowed a monthly ration of stuff automatically just for being alive, and a ration so high it exceeds almost any plausible needs at a monthly level, that is still money.
I must admit confusion here. Money is nearly ubiquitously considered a means of exchange. I'm not sure how distribution for no cost qualifies.
We have also had societies in the past that lacked money. They just had barter of goods. Even at the most basic tribal and family level, the exchange of favors and goodwill act as a type of currency. At the most basic level, currency is a means of exchanging favors, reduced to a generic form that can be used for almost anything by almost anyone, including people you do not know. Whenever I have read or watched fiction in settings where they pride themselves on having no money, I repeatedly see them use it, they just do not call it that.
Again, I'm going to be deviating from the conversation a bit by focusing on real-world examples instead of science fiction. The real question here is whether currency or money is necessary, yes? Well, as I mentioned prior, the SFEcon Model 0, which I will leave a source to in the description, is an example of a centralized command economy algorithm that would still rely on supply and demand fluctuations and the same arbitrary economic precepts that we use today. In these ways, the model could manage the economy without the need for the use of currency by citizens. Of course, the economy would be somewhat altered from what it is today, but the point is that a moneyless, centralized economy is possible. However, this brings up the notion of which is preferable, which we'll get to shortly.
Now, with extreme abundance, a lot of things could end up essentially free. When was the last time you bought ale, after all? And I do not mean canned ale for cleansing electronics or air tanks to go scuba diving. I would say it is probably possible to create a society that just had no currency except for major projects, but it would still need a way of dealing with ridiculous requests. Like John suddenly wants 1 million cheesecakes delivered to his house. What do? Does this never happen because people have been educated or programmed not to do such things? Do you tell John to log into a virtual reality where that is easy to do? Does John need to go in to see a citizen council that will decide whether he gets them, does not get them, or gets sent in to see a psychologist? Do they grant them as a special favor to John, because he has a halfway decent reason in their eyes, but also deserves in their eyes some extra leeway for past accomplishments?
There's a surprising amount to unpack here. Firstly, we're going to have to get into semantics. I avoided it previously, but if I don't confront it now, it will seriously impede the rest of my points. I'll make this as short as I can. How we define currency matters. If any form of exchange or act of distribution can be a currency, then I agree, we'll always need currency. However, I feel that this is an application of the term currency ad absurdum. What most mean by a moneyless society is one in which the mechanisms for trade are altered in such a way that having or not having an amount of currency does not preclude your access to resources. Traditionally, in societies that use currency, simply not having any of said currency can impede your ability to find shelter or food. If this were not true, we wouldn't have homelessness or hunger in the developed nations of Earth. Currency, then, is defined as a fabricated resource, which is positioned as to be critical to possess, as it is the means by which one facilitates gaining access to resources. Simply, I feel that Isaac is conflating currency or money with data. Although all money is data, not all data is money. Okay, moving on. Isaac has also just highlighted one of the most frequent illustrations of the faulty logic behind supportive monetary markets. The idea is simple and so widely accepted that challenging it seems almost heresy, but I'll provide a strong rebuttal against the notion. The idea is called the invisible hand of the market, and it presupposes that the activities of individual actors within a free market will drive the economy towards its optimum. In his example, John has requested an inordinate sum of cheesecakes to be delivered to his home. The boiled-down argument is that money or currency is an efficient mechanism for delineating constraints on the actions and desires of individuals. But the argument also is presupposing that there exists no other logical or preferable methodology for achieving this specificity of economic discrimination. Likewise, it assumes that currency is the optimal method. However, this is obviously not true. Firstly, one must contest the specific use of the terms efficiency, rational, and optimum within the context of the monetary market. Efficiency is not an indication of actual efficient use of resources, nor could it ever be, as the market has no objective reference point. The entire construct is based upon subjective inclinations. In the context of the market, efficiency merely refers to precision or nearness to the economic optimum, the point at which supply and demand are in equilibrium, maximizing profit, benefit, and utility. Rational, as in rational actor, has nothing to do with actual rationality, but in this context is the notion that an actor within the economy is making economic decisions which are consistent with his or her best interests, generally maximizing benefits and utility. The functioning of this profit-incentivized monetary market, which has come to be known as capitalism, results in a majority of the structural violence present in the world today. We have environmental regulations to preserve our ecological diversity, but more importantly, to stem the damage which is a direct consequence of the functioning of the market. Class disparities and all the maladies that are associated, such as higher crime rates, a lower level of education, higher mortality rates, higher fertility rates, higher rates of disease, both physical and mental, are also examples of structural violence. Consider why global warming, global hunger, and global poverty are such persistent issues today when we have the technology available to easily ameliorate the systemic causes. The monetary market is simply inefficient and insufficient. This is because the mechanisms upon which it relies directly facilitate corruption and distortion of the market itself, and this results in the often damaging market correction that is a byproduct of unregulated, encouraged growth. The growing movement towards socialism and greater regulation and widened social safety nets are direct responses to the negligence and damaging potential of the so-called free market. Historically, there was an issue with socialism, however. Technologies which provided a mechanism by which to oversee the entire economy simply didn't exist. They do now. They have for quite some time. Now, the SFEcon Model 0, which I mentioned before, is one way in which to centralize economic activity and directly control for these market aberrations. Many on the left point to these types of economic algorithms, rightly so, as methodologies by which we can facilitate the transition toward a fully socialist or communist state or world. I'm actually not an advocate of socialism, communism, nor capitalism. I think they all have a shared inherent flaw in the structure of their theories. I call this flaw the subjective and preference-oriented fallacy, which I define as the false assumption that control over gross economic or social constructs should be relegated to fallible individuals or groups of individuals acting in their own interests. Obviously, for capitalism, this fallacy has to do with the reliance upon the invisible hand of the market. For socialism or communism, though, the fallacy arises where the theory relies upon localized, organic communities based upon direct democracy. I don't think this is an answer to the sorts of intergroup conflict or intragroup schisms that exist in every contemporary society. I believe that we can create something even better, which not only does not use money, but which simultaneously provides a truly efficient production and distribution system which can provide the essentials of life and access to technological developments to all the people of Earth, based upon an objective reference system. Let's see what else Isaac has to say, and I'll begin formally constructing an introduction to an argument for the resource-based economy.
So I do not see a compelling reason why a post-scarcity civilization would need to be money-free to work, and indeed it would look like they either need it or need some sort of control system to handle either abnormal requests or prevent them from happening. The former is still arguably money, and the latter does smell a touch Orwellian to me, but I may just be biased on the matter. There is coercion, and there is coercion, after all. Most of us think folks should be allowed to believe whatever they want. We usually draw the line somewhere, though, especially when it comes to acting on it. I am not going to haul John off to an indoctrination center because he insists 2 + 2 = 5, but I certainly am not going to accord him any respect for that belief, or let him shortchange his customers when they hand him a $5 bill for a $2 item, and he gives them back $2 in change.
I wouldn't argue that a futuristic, post-scarcity civilization would strictly have to forego the use of money, but I feel there are less violent and more efficient methods for operating our civilization than this antiquated accounting system. Again, I don't accept the notion that the available economic paradigms are limited to either money or some sort of Orwellian societal and economic control. I feel this is a simplistic view of the arguments of various economic paradigms on the political spectrum, and it casts any system theorized on the left as authoritarian, totalitarian, or conflicting with personal liberty and freedom, which is hard to argue if you're aware of the arguments for the leftist economic paradigms. Anyways, let's move on to the points I want to make. I favor the Auravana Project as my go-to for information on the concept of the resource-based economy. On their website, there are in-depth specifications for the entire concept. It is a work in progress which shows much promise. I'll leave a link in the description and I hope you check it out. The Auravana Project is a holistic systems approach to the management of the biosphere of Earth. I'll be providing the most reduced of introductions to this concept here, but I have to preface this discussion with a suggestion that one do further research on this concept in order to fully understand it. First, one must consider the systems approach to the management of Earth in order to understand how economic considerations and decisions factor into the design. We have to recognize the interdependence and interrelatedness of all the processes on Earth, from abiotic resource distribution and processes happening on a spectrum of timescales from the second to geological timeframes, to the abundant biotic activities, dependencies, requirements, and contributions to the global ecology. While the rest of this introduction will focus around the activities, dependencies, requirements, and contributions of the human race, the systems approach is cognizant and considerate of the greater global context. How we make decisions incorporates these external realities and uses these as the objective reference frame I mentioned before in order to ensure sustainability, efficiency, and maximized potential as the result of the functioning of our civilization. Second, we utilize an economic systems analysis and apply our design schema to resolve the economic decision process, relying upon a confluence of scientific methodology and community consensus building in order to arrive at economically and socially optimizing conclusions. This process can be quite involved, so I again encourage you to explore the Auravana website to further explore this process. The argument for the resource-based economy is simple. It's technologically and theoretically possible. It's preferable in that it maximizes individual liberty and potential while removing the systemic catalysts of structural violence of the current paradigm, and it is a systems approach to the management of our species which has an objective frame of reference for ensuring sustainability, efficiency, and maximal potential for our economy and societies, as I mentioned before.
Even potential societies based on voluntarism, the notion that all interactions must be voluntary by both parties, assumes at least a minimal level of coercion, because you still need folks to help ensure agreements are carried out and that something is done about the guy who has gone crazy and started chasing people with an axe. The flip side, the post-scarcity benevolent dictator, might actually hold the threat of chopping people's heads off if they disobey. So there is a very wide spectrum of options there, but it would look like coercion, while not necessarily absent in post-scarcity societies, ought to be on the low side, relatively speaking. It is very hard to coerce people into doing something, or at least the coercion is minimal, either being minor or incredibly uncommon.
I'd just like to finish by saying that, again, this false dichotomy between money and totalitarianism is a fallacy. There are other options, and if anyone watching this is interested in researching the resource-based economy through the sources I'll be posting in the description, then I've done my part. Thank you, Isaac, for all the work you do and for engaging the YouTube community in this paramount topic. To the rest of you, thank you for your time and attention. If you enjoyed this content, please be sure to subscribe, like, share, and comment. Every view helps spread the word. Take care.
Got a lot tied up inside. Got Jesus on your mind, and a boy that just won't fight. Baby, it's a grind.